It is good to ask, where do we turn in a time when we are so aggrieved, when the traditional structures of religion we may have cast off, or we may not have the same tether to them that we once had in our lives, when prayer of a traditional sort or traditional hymns, songs may not have the same pull and grounding to us. You ask the question, where do we turn when we are so aggrieved? And so today is part 3 of looking at the sources of Unitarian Universalism. We say the living tradition we share draws from many sources. Here are the 6 sources. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life, transcending mystery and wonder. Words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Prophetic words and deeds. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspires us in our ethical and spiritual life. The wisdom of the world's religions. Jewish and Christian teachings, which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. And today we'll look at 5 humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And number 6, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions, which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. So today we'll take on the last 2 of these and unpack them to learn how they can be useful to us and how we can best live into them. They were first adopted in 1985, and the 6th source, the earth-centered tradition source, was added in 1995. So our movement has lived with these ideas for at least a quarter century. They are prefaced by the words, the living tradition we share. So for me, that means something that we say frequently in Unitarian Universalist congregations: revelation is not sealed. More truth, more understanding of who we are in the shape of reality, who we are and the shape of reality, and where we fit in the whole of things. More truth and understanding will be revealed over time. Revelation is not sealed. And we have no fixed canon of scripture, nothing that says these are the scriptures that we go to and nothing else, or there's no one guiding source from which we divine the answers. We look to these 6 sources and the ways that they move out into the world. The Reverend Kathleen Rollins, in this wonderful book, The Sources of Our Faith, says this: for over 200 years, Unitarian Universalists have been dancing with the holy. At times, it seems as if our rational minds take the lead, moving us gracefully around the floor to the finely metered rhythms of a Bach gavotte. At other times, mystery and wonder lead the dance, where the steps are being revealed to us even as we dance them. Throughout history, we have moved to the rhythms of mystery and wonder, prophecy, wisdom, teachings from ancient and modern sources, and nature herself. These themes comprise the sources from which we draw our strength and support. So let's start with humanism as a source. It happens that the congregation I serve in Minneapolis, when I'm not with you, we claim ourselves as the birthplace of Congregational humanism. John Dietrich came to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis in 1916, and there he articulated a goal of doing good without God, being able to be related in religious community with the ties that bind us, and all the things that religious community brings us, without adherence to belief in a supernatural power. He called it religious humanism, and today we call it congregational humanism. The senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the Reverend Dr. David Breeden, says that humanism can be boiled down to this central idea that people are more important than ideas, that we hold the world, that we hold a sense of good for the world, and we prioritize the well-being of people rather than an idea that does not always center people as holy and sacred. The Humanist Manifesto, which was first signed in 1933, proposed that the goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Humanists demand a shared life in a shared world. So think about 1933. We're about 50 years out from Darwin's articulation of evolution, or the evolutionary chain, and we're some 100 years out or more, maybe 150, from a real scientific wave and revolution. But in all that time, from the Enlightenment through the 1800s and into the early part of the 20th century, science is learning more and more, and the scientific method is becoming more inculcated into the world. The Industrial Revolution happens, and people see a change in the world around them, and always religion has sought to make sense, humans seeking to make sense of the world around them. But as people learn more and more about the actual mechanics, the actual physics of the world, the less and less they turn to a supernatural source to say, God makes the sun rise. This is from Copernicus long before. But the more we know and the more science reveals about the actual working of the world, the more philosophers and thinkers and subsequently ministers and religious people say, humanists demand a shared life in a shared world, a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Voluntarily, we do this because we're ethical people, not because we're promised a reward in the hereafter. You see the distinction of that? So I want to say that humanism is not necessarily equal to atheism, right? it often shows up in the same way, but it's not necessarily equal to atheism. Some humanists may assert that whether or not there is a God or a conscious creative being in the universe, it's unlikely that such a being would concern itself with the affairs of daily human life. We are the ones we've been waiting for, as Alice Walker taught us. So there's humanism that, and the source calls us to revere. We are informed by humanist teachings, which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason. I think it's fair to say reason in tension with emotion. We are not guided simply by our emotion, but by reason, level-headedness. Sometimes humanists are thought to be all reason and no emotion. That's a fair critique. So I think that's fair, but we're guided by reason and the results of science, not. I think the methodology of science is where I have my faith, because if science comes with a result, the methodology continues to prove that right or wrong. You see? And then this last phrase, and it's one that I struggle with a bit. It warns us against the idolatries of the mind and spirit. What a curious little phrase to tack on to the end. Humanist teachings. And they warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. So I went looking around for this a little bit, and I found a sermon by Reverend Dr. Bill Sinkford, who was the president of the UUA and now serves the congregation, the UU congregation in Portland, Oregon. He has this to say. He says liberal religion, Unitarian Universalism, is a faith without certainty, but it's not a faith without convictions, because decisions must be made, directions chosen. We make commitments in the world. And so to resist commitment would betray our hope to live lives of integrity. Right? We commit to our lives of integrity, knowing that we will make mistakes because we are human. So he says that when humanism is paired with a warning against idolatry, he refers to idolatries as something partial, a partial truth. Of course, we think about idolatry as the worship of false gods or partial gods, and perhaps partial truth masquerading as the whole truth. Now, it's easy for me to see this with others. I see idolatries all over the place. I think the worship of the cult of QAnon is absolutely an idolatry. Oh my gosh, the things that humans will believe. I may have said this to you before, but in our household, we are fond of the line by the writer Philip Roth. He was a Jewish writer, and he wrote in Portnoy's Complaint, the Goyim, this was opposite from the Jewish people, the Goyim have beliefs that would shame a gorilla. I love that line. And when we listen to the news of what some people believe, it just boggles the mind. And I need to see where I fall into idolatry as well. I need to not see where it's easy to see where the other people are doing it, but that doesn't do me any good in terms of looking for sustenance and support. I need to look for where I fall into idolatry, the hidden places that it lives in me. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think that we have in some ways made an idol of the Roe v. Wade decision. It breaks my heart that is pretty sure that Roe will be gutted, that it will fall, and it never guaranteed abortion access for everyone. It's the best we've had. It will be traumatic, and people will die when it falls, and we will find another solution. There is some other way that we can address this, and some places are already doing so. It's heartbreaking. I agree. It's been a pretty rough couple of weeks, and I've been working in this a long time. And I would say that I have made an idol out of Roe, because the whole truth is larger than that. Who is left out? How can we build something that is more inclusive? Here's another example. The more I study white supremacy culture, the more I understand the ways that it's got its hooks in me. It can't not. I'm a white-bodied person in a world that gives me access, privilege, advantage, all of those things. And so I don't often see the ways that it's got its hooks in me. Dismantling white supremacy culture in myself, looking for those hidden places, is a way of uncovering an unseen, unrecognized idolatry. It doesn't make me bad because it was there. It makes me human. Part of what humanism calls us to is our best self, and waking up each day with a commitment to be our best self, even when times are very, very difficult. Just returning to Bill Sinkford again, partial truth creates boundaries, sets up hierarchies, and justifies violence. He says both the atheist and the theist agree that ours are the only hands on earth, and that if the beloved community is to be built, we will have to do the hard and messy work of deconstruction and reconstruction. I'll close there in talking about humanism, and I'll be interested in our little conversation after to hear what you have to say about it. I'll take a quick drink here. I think coffee should be one of the sources. That's the source of my strength. As I move to the conversation about earth-centered traditions, the source that says spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. I want to turn to this beloved book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I've spoken of her here before. I've quoted her. She is both a botanist and a poet, a Native American woman, and her this book is lyrical. If you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. I go back to it frequently, and I think this quote from the book is a bridge between humanism and earth-centered teaching. She writes,
"Hey, did you know me like finding something for you and Brian?"
You've got somebody not muted, so Anne, you may want to take a look at that. In the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings, with, of course, the human being on top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Isn't that wonderful? Doesn't that just turn our sense of human hierarchy on its head? That really speaks to me. And this book is about indigenous wisdom and scientific knowledge and the teachings of plants. So she says that we have a great deal to learn from the fauna, the flora of the world. This very moment in the year, December the 5th, the first real snowfall of the year, the darkening days, the shorter days, we are inching our way ever so slowly to the solstice, when ever so slowly the light begins to return. It is an invitation every year for us to settle, hibernate a little, breathe more deeply, go to bed early, not to push back the darkness, but to welcome this rhythm of nature, this darkness that descends. Part of the language of white supremacy culture is to denigrate the dark. He's got a black heart, the equation of dark with evil. And I think there's something that we miss by always pushing back the dark. There's a quote that I'm thinking of, and I thought I had it in my document, and I don't. Wendell Berry says that to know the light, to go into the dark with a light, is to know the light. To know the dark, we have to go dark without a light, because the dark too moves and sings and travels on dark feet and dark wings. There's something mysterious and beautiful that happens in this rhythm of nature. Earth-centered traditions, whether Native American, of the very many different kinds of Native American religion, they're not all one, or indigenous teachings from other parts of the world that live in this close harmony with the cycle of life and the rhythm of nature, have ways to soothe us when we are so aggrieved. We can return to those rhythms, rest in them, not fight against them, but rest in them and listen for their teachings. I know you do this. I know that you walk and hike and are out in nature. You skate on a frozen lake, or you will be soon. You take photos that you share of the beauty, the absolute beauty of nature. How can we not return to that cycle of life and death and fallowness and returning spring and highest light, and then return again? The cycles of nature teach me every year that the light and dark are only balanced on 2 days of the year. That balance is not something that we find all the time, but rather over time. From the light to the dark, to the light to the dark, and back again through equanimity, through equinox, as it continues to move. I want to close this part with a reading from Starhawk, who is a neo-pagan and practices earth-centered tradition. This is from our gray hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition. Earth Mother, Star Mother, you who are called by 1,000 names, may all remember we are cells in your body and dance together. You are the grain and the loaf that sustains us each day. And as you are patient with our struggles to learn, so shall we be patient with ourselves and with each other. We are radiant light and sacred dark, the balance. You are the embrace that heartens and the freedom beyond fear. Within you we are born, we grow and live and die. You bring us around the circle to rebirth. Within us, you dance forever. May it be so, and amen.